All right. Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome to the Wolfgram Memorial Library's YouTube page. Today, the library is collaborating with the African and African American Studies program to celebrate Black History Month by diving into how civil rights has shaped the area around Widener University. So, lucky for us, we have access to a wonderful collection in our university archives called the George Raymond Papers. And these papers were recently used in a public history course taught by Jordan Smith. So today we are going to be hearing a presentation from this course, and we're going to have an open dialogue afterwards. Jordan, take it away.
Thanks, Christina. And I'm going to keep this really short because the focus really should be on the students who've done the work. But again, I'm Jordan Smith, Assistant Professor of History at Widener. And I'm really happy to introduce Maddie Smith, who's a first-year history major, and Mania Preston, who's a second-year anthropology major. They're also both kind of African-American studies minors as part of kind of the revitalization of that program. So a lot of kind of great connections. Maddie and Mania were both in my class in the fall, where they did some really kind of excellent work focusing on kind of protest in the 1960s in Chester. And they'll be continuing that work beyond the end of the semester and then into this summer and beyond. And I'm really excited to kind of work with them. So with that, I'm going to kind of let them I'm going to turn it over to them. I'll get out of the way. And I look forward to hearing what they have to say as well.
All right, well, I want to first start off by saying thank you to everyone who's come and is in attendance. I'm not going to try to repeat everything. My name is Maddie Smith. Once again, I'm a freshman history major, and Mania and I, we met through Professor Smith's class, and we kind of hit it off right away, and we realized we both had a lot of passion in the same areas, same subjects, and through that, we've kind of built up this research that we're really excited to share with you all. So now Mania will introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for being here with us today. Again, my name is Mania Preston. I'm a sophomore anthropology major with a minor in African American Studies. My interest in this research stemmed from my family background. Both my mom and my dad are both from Chester as well as the rest of my family. So I really wanted to dig into the city and just explore its history and see what I could find and what I could figure out and share with everyone else.
So I'll be presenting the museum panel exhibit that we submitted for our final project for Professor Smith's class. So I think I am going to need to screen share, Christina. There we go. Thank you. All right. All right. So here is the panel for our exhibit. So essentially, before I go into the fundamentals of the museum panel, I did want to give kind of a brief overview of some of the things we studied throughout our class. So all of the students were required to learn a lot about Chester's history. So before going into our specific research on the protest, we wanted to give a kind of historical background. So to start off, in 1917, World War I, the U.S. was involved with, and that led to a major economic boost in the economy, especially in Chester. So this happened in a lot of northern cities across America, as many of you are probably familiar with. But specifically in Chester, it became very industrialized. And other factors led to this, but one of them was the Great Migration. So you had a mass migration of the Southern Black population into Chester. And because of this, there were a lot of job opportunities. It was great in terms of like economic impact, but there wasn't adequate housing that was kind of going at a rate that the population was growing at. And because of this, unfortunately, a lot of the Black population in Chester had to deal with very poor quality infrastructure and housing. And those things all combined eventually led to tensions on top of that between the white population and Black population because of overpopulation issues and competition in the workforce. So that really was going on for a couple of decades. And this all kind of sprouts up again in the U.S. involvement in World War II in 1941. Everything kind of, you see a lot of patterns cross over in terms of industrialization and population growth at this time. But a big key difference that we learned throughout class was the issues of suburbanization and the white flight out of Chester into the suburbs due to redlining, or the issues of mortgages and loans being given out to, white residents and not Black residents. So therefore, a lot of the Black residents in Chester were still dealing with a lot of infrastructure issues, housing issues, and on top of this, industries in Chester started to decline, leading to more poverty rates in the Black community. So that's kind of a general housing and economic view of where Chester was at and how that was leading into the concerns of the Black community from what we studied in the 1964 protests. And Manaya is going to go over some of the issues concerning the education that were a direct result of housing and educational policies.
Now we're going to move into education, as Maddie said. So jobs began to be outsourced to foreign countries, which caused deindustrialization in the city of Chester. With the deindustrialization came a phenomenon called the Great White Flight, which is where mass amounts of white residents moved out of Chester into nearby suburbs such as Ridley and Woodland. With the white residents leaving, their tax money left with them, which caused the quality of the schools to deteriorate significantly in Chester.
So now we're going to start to go into the actual panel that we created. So we titled our exhibit The Forgotten Protests because we believe that the protests were really significant and important for the Chester area. But Chester wasn't as big of a city as like Philadelphia or New York, Chicago. So their protests were kind of, although they were studied, they were, kind of put on the back burner compared to other civil rights movements. And this first introductory statement here, we kind of went over a lot, but I just want to, explain the two main civil rights groups that were kind of in charge in the area, I would say, or like very significant. So the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that becomes pretty important in Chester. I'll talk about that more later when I discuss the sources that we use. But the George Raymond papers that Widener actually has access to and has digitalized, he was the president of the Chester chapter of the NAACP, so that's kind of a significant connection to Widener and everything that we're going to be discussing. And the CFFN, which is the Chester Committee for Freedom Now, was founded by Stanley Branch, and he was actually previously associated with the NAACP, but there was a bit of a conflicting issue between the NAACP and the CFFN, which we studied in class, and how the Committee for Freedom, or the Chester Committee for Freedom Now, wanted to progress civil rights quickly, and they believe that the NAACP wasn't acting fast enough. So as you'll see in our discussion on protests, a lot of them were headed by the CFFN because they wanted that immediate, equality. And then here, Manaya did work on some of the primary sources, so she's going to go over what this picture is.
All right, so to the left is a picture of the Franklin School, which is an elementary school that was previously located in Chester. The school served as ground zero for the fight against de facto segregation, and de facto segregation is racism that's not by law but by social norm. Parents and community members were extremely upset due to the poor conditions of the school, especially in comparison to the predominantly white schools that were also in the area. They initially took action against this form of discrimination in 1963, but it gained traction in 1964 during the mass outbreaks of protests. Education and housing issues were extremely closely connected. Housing discrimination kept African American families out of specific school zones, so the families were unable to put their children into better schools because they were forced into neighborhoods that were determined by race. This created a vicious cycle and kept de facto segregation alive. We're going to move into some protest specifics. So in 1963, the NAACP and the CFFN became heavily involved in the fight against de facto segregation. The Chester School Board argued that the housing policies were the reason for the segregation in schools, and that it was out of their reach to fix it. Like basically saying that like it's a problem that they can't fix because it's too big, it's too powerful. There were some suggestions made, such as busing students into the school, but the school board argued that that would just be too costly. So on February 11th, 1964, it was an extremely important day. This is the day that the CFFN really kickstarted their series of protests, and it ended up ending on April 22nd, 1964, when the school board just decided to completely shut down. Some important names that we want to keep in mind are Wilbur Johnson, which is a CFFN youth leader, Timothy Tyler, which was a reporter, and we want to pay special close attention to Walter Bryant. He was a student at PMC, which is Pennsylvania Military College, which for those of you who don't know is now Widener University, and he was arrested right in the vicinity. There was an extra push in the fight for racial equality in February of 1964. This is where the protests began to gain traction and intensify. April 24th, 1964 was a night plagued by violence, including police brutality. On this night, hundreds of protesters gathered not far from our very own campus, blocking intersections, demanding equality. The protests became so violent that the governor of that time, Governor Scranton, felt the need to call in additional reinforcement.
So as Benaya previously did go over briefly, this is a picture depicting Walter Bryant, who she already explained was from the Pennsylvania Military College, or what we know as Widener now. So just to go into more specific detail on his involvement in the protest. So he was a 21-year-old student attending the university, and he was arrested at the protest, and he was actually hospitalized as well due to one of the instances of police brutality where he was assaulted and he sustained head injuries. So a lot of these protests were unfortunately plagued with a lot of violence, a lot being police battery on civilians, demonstrating their right to protest. And just to kind of articulate this, the Chester youth really did play a significant role in the protest due to the CFFN headed by Stanley Branch. Another name we did highlight was Wilbur Johnson, who was a youth leader for the CFFN. And he had instances of police violence, including when they were attacking his mother. He was beaten by police, and the news reports show that there was police officers that stayed to continue assaulting him even after he was arrested. And among all of this violence, journalists and photographers who were just trying to capture what was going on had their cameras taken and thrown, and a lot of their cameras were broken, and injuries were actually sustained to the photographers and journalists at the time. So it really was, it became a national issue because a lot of journalists were being assaulted. So that is one of the pictures we did find of Walter Bryant. So getting into the aftermath, so I'm going to be discussing kind of some of the legal ramifications and governmental actions that occurred after the protests. So as Manaya stated, Governor William Scranton at the time of Pennsylvania did call in for reinforcement, but he wasn't just calling in to give physical aid. He also appointed the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission to lead in investigating all of the civil rights claims that were going on in Chester. So then the Human Relations Commission, I'm just going to refer to them as the commission, they started hearings in Chester, and they were actually conducted at the Pennsylvania Military College, or otherwise known as Widener, on May 4th, 1964. So here, there was a lot of testimony brought forth of civil rights claims, and there was a couple of people in attendance that we already discussed, like George Raymond and Stanley Branch, headers of the NAACP and CFFN. And after 8 days of specific hearings and then a couple of months of more further investigation into the community and a lot of the institutionalized issues, on November 20th of 1964, so a couple months after everything already went down, they made an official statement that the Chester School Board was responsible for the segregation of the public schools, and that it was their responsibility to fix this issue. So prior to this, the Chester School Board kind of relied on the notion that it was out of their hands. It was housing issues, social issues, things that they had no control over in order to fix. And they even claimed, as Manaya stated, that any of the solutions that were being brought up were too expensive, and just since it's out of their control, it was unfair to put that burden on them. So the commission stating this was extremely important to the Chester community, and it further showed that these protests really were important. And had they not occurred, this commission may not have ever been involved with the claims that were going on in the city to end de facto segregation. So here I have a primary source I found. It was from a news article from the Evening Bulletin in Philadelphia on April 28, 1964, after the initial protests were going on. So this news article essentially just shows an outside view of what was going on with the protests in Chester from nearby city Philadelphia. And they were agreeing with Scranton's decision to bring in, further aid with the commission to help end the dispute going on. So there was support and momentum behind what was going on. The protest really became something that gained and garnered attention. And then here, I also wanted to bring in the other side of what the school board was arguing. So this is actually a manuscript from this Chester School District, and it was their position from 1966 on de facto segregation. So after the commission had released their initial claims that the school board was responsible, it actually wasn't something that stopped there. The school board took it up in the courts. There were a lot of appeals that went on, and lower courts were initially siding with the school district. But the school district argued that the commission had no jurisdiction to actually enforce the school board to change anything. But eventually the case reached the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania in 1967. And here they claimed that the commission was correct in their initial statement, and that all these schools that were separated were unequal. So what's really important is it highlighted that how the Black students were going to schools that were genuinely inferior, both physically and in terms of education, than the white students, or like the schools with predominantly white population. So this was something at a state level that was it set precedent for future cases. And just from the position paper, I just did want to state that here it kind of says the school system did not create the housing pattern. The problem must be met by our churches, our government, and all of our social agencies. All we can do is to mitigate some of the results, and whatever we do must not produce more harm than good. So clearly the school board, although this was kind of deemed as something that was rendered false in the end, they really genuinely did believe that it wasn't the school board's responsibility to fix this issue, and it was just a social issue.
I'm going to move into some of the sources we used. I'm going to talk about mine, and then Maddie will follow behind me and discuss hers. So my first one was the Swarthmore College database, and I found this really interesting because we entitled our project The Forgotten Protests because we do feel as though it was swept under the rug and wasn't reported on as widely as it should have been. So to see other colleges in our area genuinely take an interest, so much so that they created their own database at their school dedicated to our city and the protests that happened in our city, it was like super comforting to see, and also made me feel supported throughout the project, just to know that someone else is interested. Another interesting resource that I took particular interest in was oldchesterpa.com, which is a website, and it's filled with businesses, people, pictures, addresses who've been a part of Chester's community for 50 plus years. Residents are able to reflect on Old Chester, as my parents and grandparents say, that they know and still love. They also have a Facebook page that's filled with historical information where people just kind of comment their memories, where they used to live, where they used to work, their family connections. And it's really cool to see because these people don't even know what they're doing for us, like the students who are researching this. They don't even know that we're interested. They don't even know that we're watching, but their stories are truly history. And it just makes me so excited that they just share this. So I hope to take those stories and take those comments and make them into something like super huge and super monumental. So Maddie's going to go ahead and share her sources.
Yeah, so we did all utilize like similar sources, but in terms of our research, it was kind of different since we took on different stages of the research. A lot of mine had to do with the aftermath. So I did utilize a lot of the Human Relations Commission's specific research, any NAACP paperwork I could find online. A lot of what I went over were legal proceedings and cases of like the aftermath of what was going on. And including in all of this, a lot of the help that we got in researching the specifics of the protests were from the Delaware County Historical Archives. It was the system they use makes it very easy to research Chester and like highlight certain names that were found. So a lot of the information we found was also from there. But most importantly, there were two main sources that we really wanted to highlight and give our gratitude to. So first being the George Raymond papers. George Raymond's family actually allowed Widener to maintain and then digitalize the scrapbooks that he had collected through being president of the Chester NAACP. So a lot of the information we got were specifically from there, and I'm not sure it would have been as easy to find them had his family not been as gracious enough to allow the Widener students to utilize those papers. And also, we wanted to give almost a shout out to Christopher Melee because he was an author who researched a lot of the issues going on in Chester. He was actually a guest speaker in our class, and he wrote Race and the Politics of Deception. And we all studied this book in class, but I know for me and for Manaya, we definitely always found ourselves coming back to the book because the way it laid out the history of Chester and the specifics of even the NAACP and CFFN relations, it was just very well done. And we wanted to really highlight how much it helped us in our presentation and our research.
So Maddie, for this section, feel free to unmute and jump in at any time. So we're super excited to announce that we're continuing this research in the summer of 2021. We are beyond excited. And I know Maddie can attest to that too. Like, this is all we talk about. So basically, we hope to shed light on Chester's past while connecting it to its present and ultimately improving its future. One of our big goals is bridging the obvious and painful gap between the wider community and the rest of the city of Chester. One of my personal main goals is to make everyone understand that Chester is the way that it is today. Because, like, I want people to understand that it's not that way. It's not its own fault. Like, I want people to understand that there was discrimination, there was racism, there was hatred, there was redlining, all different sorts of systematic things in that put Chester in the situation that it is today. And I think that's a really important for us as Widener students and Widener community members to understand. And we also are interested to know the role of Widener. And we are going to highlight, we want to know more about Widener's role in the history of Chester and were we on the right side is the big question, even going back to our PMC days. We plan on developing an app that takes users on an interactive tour around Widener and the surrounding area, displaying important landmarks along with the rich history each of them holds. So Maddie's going to talk a little bit about her goals and about the project and what she hopes to gain from it.
Yeah, thank you, Anaya. So I have to agree a lot of what we were working on. It was just due to like personal passions, I think. So with the research that we're conducting, although it's specifically for Chester, I know for me, I don't have like the background with family members living in Chester, residing in Chester. I only really visited Chester when I started going to Widener University. But I live in New Jersey, not far from Chester. I live in Salem City. And a lot of the issues that I've seen in terms of deindustrialization, in terms of like infrastructure, economic issues, I see a lot of that paralleled in my city. And I know a lot of these issues is something that goes on around cities across America. And to be able to look at somewhere so close to home and so similar to home, it really like connects to you and like your experiences and your role in something. And helping me understand, because I can't understand the issues of the Black community in a way of personal experience, but looking at what went on that was controlled, the politics that went into things, the policies that went into things, the way that the courts ruled. And for me, when I eventually go to law school, I want to look at that and study that and see if there are resolutions. And without this fundamental knowledge, especially for our community, I don't know how you could solve issues without understanding why the issues are there to begin with. So that's kind of how we both are looking at it. And I know Manaya's offered me so much insight on things I would have never understood had I not been working with someone who has so much experience in the community itself and family members in the community. So that's kind of what we're looking at for our research. But I know we were going to open it up to questions or any comments or anything like that in discussion.
Yes, and may I be the first to congratulate you on an excellent presentation. I am absolutely impressed, 100%. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. We do have one question already in the comments, and that is to please go over the websites that you guys were mentioning when you talked about the different public resources that were available. And the chat is now open. You can start sending in questions, and I will be asking them.
Okay, if you guys give me like 10 seconds, I'm going to pull up the both of the websites that I referenced. 1 second.
Well, I can start off. Widener itself, we utilize the library archives. I'm not sure exactly what it's referred to. I can pull it up now. I know we went through Widener's archives. Like, it's like the digital Wolfgram library under Widener. And they have like the collection of the George Raymond papers. And it's all cataloged really great. Everything is easy to look at. So one of those things that we looked at in terms of like news scraps, articles, things like that, we went through there. And I know I utilized a lot of the Delaware County Historical Archives is what it's called. And it's just like an online database of like the Delaware County, I think the Delaware County Daily Times was one of them. And if you see here with my Walter Bryant presentation, that was one of the archives that I used for my research.
And you are still sharing your screen. So if you want to end that, you can, or if you want to keep sharing it, you can. Either way.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
All right. If I can share it now?
Please do, yes.
Okay, I can. It says host disabled.
I thought I had made you a co-host. I apologize. You should be good now.
Yes, okay. So, this is the first website I discussed, so it's just www.oldchesterpa.com.
We're not seeing it yet. I'm sorry.
No, you're not. Okay, I'm sorry. Let me try again. Hold on.
That's okay. There we go.
Are we there?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is the first website I discussed, which, like I said, is just www.oldchesterpa.com. So you can scroll through so many businesses, biographies, businesses, cemeteries, like really anything you can think of. It does have some pictures, like I discussed, where people just can kind of come back and reminisce on the old Chester that they know and love. So it's super cool. Chester High, which I know a lot of my family went through here. So I encourage everyone watching to go explore and bop around this website because it has so much information and I found it so interesting just to see. And the second one, this is the Swarthmore database that I was discussing. Okay. So again, it just has some information about the, as you can see here, it says like 1963, just some information about the protest that we were discussing. And like I said, it was so awesome to see that we're sharing this interest with fellow college students and colleges and other universities in our area. I'm just excited that other people are taking an interest in it. So I'd also encourage you guys to go check out this website if you have some time.
Yeah, and I can share my screen again. I did pull up the websites I utilize as well. So this is through Widener, specifically the University Archives digital collections. So this is what the George Raymond papers look like. And if you go further into this and browse, everything's cataloged according to date, I think. And then you can go in further and anyone can access this, I believe,
it is open
through Widener.
Mm-hmm. It is open.
And it's awesome. Like a lot of these things, like you can go through, everything is like, if you look here, very systematically done. And then another thing, I brought up Walter Bryant here, but this is for the Delaware County Archives. And if you see here, they'll highlight the name that you looked up, and then you can look through the actual newspapers that they archive digitally, which is where we obtained this picture from. So yeah, those are the things that I think were really important that we use.
Awesome. Okay, I do have some other questions. One from Jen Wise is, when you all were doing your research, what was something that surprised or inspired you?
Something that we didn't really go too far into detail with in our presentation, but I know we discussed a lot in class, were the machine politics that went on. So we discussed a lot about the McClure machine. I know another group that was presenting in our class, one of the group members, Liam Thompson, he went into a lot of detailed discussion on that. And I remember not recognizing until the class how much, politics had a role in things, and how one person who had political control could really affect a lot of areas in people's lives in Chester. And I know when I was researching George Raymond, we had oral interviews that we got to have access to, which was really awesome, being able to hear these people talk themselves and answer questions. So George Raymond, he discussed the machine politics, and to hear it from someone who was living in that moment, and it was just extremely surprising. And that's something with our future research we hope we can uncover more of, especially with it relating to Widener, since the McClure Mansion is literally right around Widener's campus.
Something that inspired me, Maddie kind of just mentioned this, we were able to listen to Chester residents, and there were two in particular that sat with me. One was, forgive me, I forgot her name, but she was the granddaughter of George Raymond, and one was Miss T, which was a, I believe, English teacher at Chester High. So just hearing their stories and hearing their excitement and sharing their stories with us, I could see the genuine joy on their face that us as Widener students were interested in looking into their stories and interested and willing to listen to their stories. So that kind of gave me fuel to just keep going. There are people out here who see us, they hear us, they support us, and they want us to keep going. So Maddie and I have already discussed we're doing this for ourselves, but we're also doing this for multiple communities, such as the Chester community and the Widener community, because we just want to bridge the gap. That's our big goal, is bridging the gap.
The first person Manaya was mentioning is Donna Mims, who's actually herself a Widener alum as well.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's so cool. Another question from Rebecca Wise is, how long did it take you both to complete this fabulous presentation that you shared with all of us today?
It was pretty much a semester-long project. When Professor Jordan introduced it to us, Maddie and I literally right away we started. I can't speak for everyone else in the class, but I know oh my gosh, me and Maddie were just yes, let's do this. So we were really excited. We jumped right into it, and Saturdays, Fridays, 2 a.m., it was history. It was Professor Jordan's class. So this was a pretty long process, and we plan to continue grinding this out together, because we find so much joy in sharing this with you guys and making these presentations for you guys and sharing everything we find. So
yeah, I absolutely agree. It's kind of scary. We have a Google document of all the information that we ended up annotating, taking notes on, and it's extensive and almost embarrassing how much we worked on it. But our biggest issue with the class wasn't getting the material. It was winding all of that down into something that we could have in a cohesive, quick presentation. So that, I would say, if there is a question about that, that was definitely our biggest obstacle throughout the research.
I am double checking just to make sure. I think we've gotten to all of the questions that have been asked so far. We do have a few more minutes if other people would like to add questions, but the chat is just overwhelmingly thankful and appreciative of all that you guys have done. So again, thank you for being willing to come into this crazy live stream and throw a little bit of attention over to the university archives. I know they love that.
So one thing, just for a second, I'll interject. And so first of all, I want to say that this presentation was fabulous. I think those of professors kind of in the crowd would probably agree in saying that I've been at many academic conferences where the quality of presentation was not that high. But I want to, whenever we do these sorts of events, I think there's a certain amount of us advertising and kind of shamelessly plugging that goes into things. So one thing I just wanted to kind of mention was that this is kind of an ongoing project that will kind of will take different forms in the next several years. We've got people working on it this summer. There will be kind of future classes. Kind of uniting the different parts of this is something that I think Manaya did a really good job of kind of explaining, where we're taking kind of the traditional sources that we think of when we think of historians, like dusty legal documents and other things like that. And we're combining things that are kind of created by the recollections of people who lived these events, whether that's these oral histories whether that's kind of websites that don't necessarily look like what historians often use. And together we're trying to kind of bridge those documents, think about kind of history and memory, and create a community accessible history of kind of 20th century Chester. And so part of that is hopefully a traveling museum exhibit that you all saw kind of an example of kind of what one of the groups did. Obviously, we'll continue kind of building on that. Another one is this kind of augmented reality phone app that we're kind of working on this summer, and I'm sure it'll take other forms as well. So Maddie and Manai have really kind of taken the bull by the horns here, and that's great, but there's absolutely room for other kind of people who are interested to kind of get involved in the project in different ways. My strongest recommendation would be to reach out to Maddie and Manaya. They can give you a sense of kind of what they're working on, but you can also kind of reach out to me. I think we have a fair amount of momentum right now, and we want to keep that the ball rolling. So I'm going to stop talking now. But again, I wanted to kind of express my appreciation and also kind of put that plug in.
We do have one last question. It is from Cheryl Streety, and she asks, did the protests that you spoke about have connections with other protests in surrounding areas?
Well, I think one of the things that we researched was in Delaware, there were also protests going on. And we researched it through class, and a lot of these protests were going on at the same time. So they were all kind of linked, especially due to like the NAACP's involvement. But Chester, it was unique because of the CFFN, the Chester Committee for Freedom Now. So a lot of what was going on was, I think, unique to Chester in terms of what we researched from the protests. But there were definitely overlaps throughout like cities across the country at the same time.
And she adds, was it similar to the way that sit-ins were organized in southern universities and cities? I actually went to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and Greensboro, North Carolina was one of the locations where many sit-ins were organized, and there were some really powerful leaders who were able to connect those people together. Do you guys have an example of that happening around here? And it's okay if the answer is we're not sure. That's completely okay.
There were a lot of protests that went on. We highlighted, like a certain event that was kind of like it wasn't just a catalyst. It was kind of like the tip of the iceberg situation because of the intervention through Governor Scranton. But prior to that, there were sit-ins that were going on facilitated by the CFFN. And I know I came across that in my research. And you even can see overlap of certain people. Like I'm pretty sure Walter Bryant was even involved in one of the sit-ins and arrested prior to that. So, it wasn't something that was just like a couple of nights events. It was something that was going on for months.
Yeah, I do think that the events can definitely be connected to other events that were going on nationally. Like I mentioned, in February of 1964, there was an uptick. And when I talked about the uptick in civil rights movements, it was everywhere. It wasn't just in Chester. And we do have multiple prominent figures of the NAACP and the CFFN who kind of jump-started this and wanted better for themselves, wanted better for their community. So yes, there were figureheads that pushed the movement similar to other cities. So I think it was almost like a ripple effect through the nation. And we're thankful for that.
And Deja says hello through the chat. All right. Well, again, thank you guys so much. I have really appreciated all of your effort and hard work and all of your passion too. Thank you, Jordan, for giving us these wonderful students. And thank you, everyone, for attending. I really appreciate it. A quick, brief plug. The library is doing a short discussion, or no, it's actually going to be a short presentation, sorry, next Friday at 1 o'clock about open education resources. So these are free resources that are available at all levels of education that we can use more of at Widener. So if you're interested in that, please come back here and we will see you then. Thank you also to the African and African American Studies program and for Widener University.